So, in some of my previous videos, which I linked, I talked about a new design for a concentrated photovoltaic using 3D printed lenses, and why concentrated photovoltaics, which are solar cells that we focus light on with a lens, are more efficient and a bunch of little advances they have. In here, I want to talk about how we can make them even better for diffuse light and tracking. Now, this might not be for a home setup, it may be. It depends on the level of technology, and how fancy it is. Well, tracking sunlight first, and I'll put links for numbers for this stuff, can increase solar efficiency anywhere from 5 to 30%. It's a huge range, but it really depends on a bunch of conditions. The cloudier the weather is, kind of less it is, because the more diffuse light is already coming. So it doesn't matter where you point your cell, it's all cloudy. And light is being scattered by raindrops and everything in all directions. The closer to the equator, the more direct the sunlight is, and the less advantage you have, and the more power you have already. And there's other things, like you might have trees and stuff in the way that blocks out it, so it blocks out the light at low angle, so you don't have more of the light only just midday. It doesn't matter when you track as much as midday is when you get most of your energy. But still, tracking can give you a lot of energy. Now there is a lot of things. It's like also tracking requires a certain amount of energy put in to figure out where the sun is or where the maximum light is, and also just to move all the stuff. However, I think using a concentrator to concentrate light on the solar cell will give some of the advantages back. Now, briefly again, how concentrators, without going as much in depth, concentrators increase solar efficiency is that in solar cells you have some resistance or something you have to push against to get energy out. Now this force is more or less constant, and I'm going to call it TC. The more concentrated you are, the more you have a force pushing back, and the less that loss becomes a big deal. If TC is constant, but the amount that you're pushing against is higher and higher and higher, it becomes a small percentage you have to push against. That's a brief explanation. Other videos have a lot longer explanation. So, the thing about solar focusers compared to, and all these concentrators, mirrors and lenses and stuff, is oftentimes they're lighter than a solar cell per same area. That means that using them in a tracking system, which people have done, you have to move less mass. So that's return on investment there. Less mass and less energy. Half the mass you have to use, but half the amount of energy to move it. Another thing, also you can move it more precise, except for if you have wind and stuff blowing it. Another thing is that from the side angles, you get more light from the side because you're concentrating sunlight in this blue thing is the concentrator from here, but you still have area exposed here and here where diffuse light can get in. So you also still let more diffuse light if you have a separate in a tracker. The other thing about concentrators, because they focus light, they don't work as well with diffuse light. So lining it up makes it even more important. Because they're focusing on a point, and that point slightly off, it's a bigger deal. Now, to make it even better with tracking everything, you could have something new I came up with, stuff on the side to focus it. I would call these side focuses, but this will focus light on the solar cell coming from more diffuse beams like here and here, which will make tracking less important, but it does add mass, which means you have to move the whole thing more slow, and they're not as good as and you might also wonder why you don't put it in direct way. So you would have to balance it out and figure out for each latitude how much better from diffuse light. Diffuse light typically makes about 10% of light. Another thing you could do to make this whole thing cleaner is you can have this ion cleaning technology, which has not been really commercially used, but NASA looked into it. We put a thin coating on either your solar cell or your lens that makes a little ionic current if you put electricity to it, An ionic current means that you make some molecules have a plus or negative charge and it moves it to the opposite charge. This light wind, first of all, can take actually repel dust, and it can also cause a slight wind to move dust off the object, keeping it cleaner. Also, by moving this whole thing, the concentrate and everything, you take off some of the dust. And you don't always have it directly in the dust beam. Now, can you make this whole system even better? Well, if you move the panel, the concentrator, and the solar cell, you can get even better, because the solar cell now is much smaller, so it actually might become lighter. So you can figure out ways to move the lighter thing a little bit to save power. But the heavier thing, moving also, might work better for moving a more direct one, the concentrator. But moving the solar cell, you might be able to move it so it focuses more on the indirect sunlight. And by that, I mean like changing the angle. So it's still focused on the same spot. Like here is still focused with the concentrator, but changing the angle might make it get better light that's reflected off here or something like that. So smaller cell might be able to get better the indirect light in some ways. Another thing I thought about having instead of just plain side focuses, instead having, I do it with red by having bottom here, but we can also just draw it again. A new one like this, and we make it normally like this. We 3D print it. It's like a bag. In this bag, we can fill it up with air and change it so it either becomes more flat and focuses on point here, or more rounded, where it can't focus it. It doesn't have as much area here because it's rounded and now squished up into a little ball, but it can take side light more. That was an idea I had, and that would be cheap, and the air we pump in could also change other things. We can also change the distance to make it focus more on a soft spot or not. And by having all these options available, it means that we can do some better algorithms, that we don't have to design it as much for just one location. It can adapt to a location as it comes, or as environmental things change, like during different times of year, if we're missing data, we can just more change it up instead of retrofitting everything. Also, we can have it for more on news or weather events. And also a thing we could do to make this whole system much better is that, and also like we can scale production more, because we just always use the same production for every location, which makes everything cheaper. Also, another thing is that if different techniques have different cons or pros, but they can lead to the same outcome sort of, we can balance them out a little more better. Such as moving one thing works better for direct sunlight in this way, but indirect in this way, and vice versa. And we don't know what's the exact optimum. We can kind of balance it out, like do half this way and half that method. We don't know what's the best method. Well, thank you very much for listening. Please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers in a year and 4,000 watch hours, so I can devote more time to this and so I can get my works out more, which is really hard, but with your help, I think I can do it. Also, if you have any ideas for future videos, comments, or suggestions, or anything at all, leave them in the comment section below. Thank you very much. Goodbye.